Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. I wanted to talk to you about a problem today that I think our society is facing in ever increasing waves. Something that really impacts the way that we organize our society, the way that we understand how we should be grouped together and how our economy should work, our relationships should work, our spirituality should work. All of these things are shaped by elites. We know, if you're a fan of this channel, if you've watched it before, you know that we're big believers in elite theory in on this channel, that elites drive societal change, that they shape the way that society functions. They're not the only thing. It's not that there's no influence from the popular masses or just reality itself, but the culture of elites, the way that they think, because they are the ones that spend so much time influencing every one of our institutions, every one of our interactions, there tends to be a heavy emphasis on what they understand and what they believe. And that becomes really important when more and more of your society is managed. The more of your society that falls under the sway of government or institutions, large scale things like that, the more it matters what the elite think, because they're no longer just affecting an area, they rule a specific place, or they only interact with their community, a city, or maybe even a state. They impact the entire nation, sometimes the entire empire. In the case of the United States. And so it becomes increasingly important how they think about other people. The way they see other people, the way that they model other people's behavior becomes incredibly important, because if they are the ones planning the economy, planning the way that society should run, logistics, organization, then they will necessarily impact other people of lower classes. And if they don't understand the needs of those people, if they don't understand the way that those people live their lives, then you end up in a very unhealthy place where average people or lower working class type people end up having their lives managed by people who cannot imagine the way in which they exist, the things that drive those people, the things that motivate them, the way that their lives actually function. And I'm going to get into an example today that kind of recently popped up in kind of the conservative Twitter sphere. But again, I don't want to focus on Twitter drama. That's really just a springboard to discuss a larger issue that I think is really impacting us. So if you're wondering, hey, Auron, why do you have all those apples hanging out in the picture there? What's going on with that? If you have been online, you may have seen this. If not, I'll just explain it real quick. This is a chart that is supposed to display kind of the idea of modeling an image in your mind, right? If you go to the average person and you say, think about an apple, they're going to be able to model it somewhere along this continuum, right? One is kind of somebody who can completely reproduce in high detail a perfect facsimile of the apple. They can not just think about it, but they could rotate it, they could make changes to it, and it would keep its integrity in detail. They are able to model with a high degree of accuracy what a real object looks like, and they can manipulate it, change it, and still maintain that level of kind of fidelity of the object. And at the 5 in there, you have someone who totally cannot visualize the apple. Like if you say, think about an apple, that they know what it is. They can think about different aspects of it. They could recall to mind perhaps the flavor of an apple, the crisp sound it makes when you bite into it, but they do not have the ability to bring that object into mind and manipulate it. Now, there's a term for this. It's called aphasia, I believe. Sorry, I know I'm probably saying that wrong. The point being is that that's not, the inability to rotate or model that apple entirely accurately is not necessarily a complete indication of intelligence, though it is often treated that way. But there are intelligent people who are just unable to conjure the image and rotate the shape, right? And this is supposed to be, again, a lot of people will say it's a function entirely of intelligence. I'm sure somebody who is far more well-versed in IQ research, that kind of thing, someone like Ed Dutton or Charles Murray could probably tell you more about that. I am not an expert in that area, and I'm not going to pretend to be, but that is often the way that people understand it. Either way, it is very clear that intelligence has some correlation to mapping things and modeling things, right? We can see this. Low IQ people are often unable to think into the future, unable to delay gratification, unable to kind of think their way through more complex understandings of issues. This is the same thing you hear people talk about, like the hypothetical. If someone has an internal monologue, whether or not they're able to kind of have this ability to hear. If you have these things, if you can model the apple, if you have the internal monologue, if you have the ability to think through hypotheticals, what you had for breakfast, that kind of stuff, if you have this stuff available to you, you probably don't even think about it, right? Like, you don't think about these as any kind of superpower. It's just something your brain does, and it's probably done your entire life. You didn't work for it. You didn't earn it. You didn't create this thing because you studied real hard in a book or flexed this muscle. It's just something you can do, right? And because you can do that, it gives you an ability to kind of model things, understand things, abstract things in a way that others can't. Now, to be clear, that does not make you a better person. Your ability to model something does not make you morally better. It has no impact on that. It simply means you have this ability, just like the guy who can, run extremely fast, or the particularly beautiful woman. These are things that they are often born with. They have to train it to some level, but they're born with it. It's a mix of both nature and effort. You can be proud about the effort, but ultimately, the nature is a gift and it's a blessing when you have it, but it doesn't make you better or worse. That's a human reality about people. But if you don't have the ability to model these things, then you don't know it, right? Like, you don't understand the problem of not being able to model it. And the really funny thing is, of course, elites like to think of themselves as very high IQ, and oftentimes that's true, right? A lot of them were put into those positions because they're intelligent. Not so much anymore, obviously, with DEI and kind of selecting for political loyalty. We see a lot more of people being selected who don't have that high degree of intelligence. But at some level, when there was a meritocracy, and there's still a lot of momentum of that. Sorry, I know there's DI at, NASA or SpaceX or whatever, but you're still probably relatively smart if you're doing those jobs, as long as you're not running like the HR department or something. And so there is still a certain level at which, like, IQ does tend to accumulate at kind of these elite levels, doing these elite jobs, planning things for the future. If you're working in kind of these different departments, or you're creating these things in corporations or in government or all these other places, you're responsible for leading in these areas. You probably have some level of IQ, at least, even if you're not a super genius, you're probably running above room temperature. You're probably at least a midwit, right? Like, you're at least running above the median on that. However, a really interesting problem has occurred as we have taken IQ and made that like the premier thing we select for when we select elites. There's a problem has been created, right? Because IQ is problem solving ability, and it's incredibly valuable. I'm not going to undersell you on the importance of IQ. However, it's not the only thing. And throughout human history, high IQ is correlated with a lot of good traits, but it wasn't the only thing someone selected for. Throughout much of history, the ability to, be very strong or be very fast, have other abilities that were critical to survival. You're in the Middle Ages, your ability to beat someone to death with a sword was pretty important. Being a brilliant tactician is good, but that wasn't the only thing you were selected for, right? There are other things that would turn you into an elite in many of those scenarios. But in our increasingly complex and information-based order, in an order where we tend to select for the ability to manipulate numbers or abstract ideas, words on a page, or something on a spreadsheet somewhere, IQ becomes more and more the only selection tool we use. Now, obviously, that's not entirely correct. Again, I know DEI exists, nepotism exists. A lot of people who go to Harvard don't just go there because they have the highest, IQ. They don't just have the best SAT scores. I get that. I'm not telling you that, oh, the elites are always brilliant and they're always the smartest people. And if you're not in the elite, then you're stupid. I'm not saying any of that. I'm simply saying when you look at what our sorting mechanism is for who's going to be in the ruling class, right? What is it at this point? It's universities. And universities make everyone take an IQ test to enter. Now, again, a lot of people fudge it. A lot of people are legacy or the DEI or there's some other way that they get around that straight meritocratic. But like at the core of the entrance into our cognitive elite is this IQ score, right? And that is how we sort who's going to be in the big important jobs, who's going to run the Fortune 500 companies and the banks and, make media and entertainment and all of these things, and who is not, right? It tends to be this IQ thing. And that sounds good, right? These are people who are selected for that ability. They should be the best at what they do. They're very intelligent, right? However, the problem with IQ selection is that it has a way of pulling people out of their communities and the connections with other people. And that makes for a elite that cannot understand the average person. Now, I know what you're saying. Or an elites that don't understand the average person. Wow, that's new. That's novel. I get it. Yes, I know. Throughout history, elites are famous for eventually, kind of falling out of touch with the average people. You think of something like the French Revolution, right? That's the first thing that pops into mind. But don't forget, the French Revolution, one of the reasons the elites were so out of touch with the people is that previous to the revolution, Louis XIV built the Palace of Versailles and pulled all of the lords away from, touch with kind of the common people and made them all spend their time at the court, right? If you want to separate the aristocracy from kind of the land that they're supposed to be watching over, the peasants that they're supposed to be have a duty to and that they're supposed to be tied to. That's a great way to gain more power as a ruler, but it's also a great way to cut off kind of your elite's connection with the people. So I'm not saying that this doesn't exist throughout history. The longer an elite goes, the more insular they become, the more they tend to be out of touch with the common man. I understand this phenomenon. However, the way it's done in our current iteration is very specifically tied to IQ, right? Again, this is how people are selected to go into these scenarios. And the problem is that we should be able to model, right? The IQ is supposed to give you the ability to turn the apple around and see what's going on and investigate, abstract these things, right? You should be able to, in theory, as a high IQ elite, grasp the common man, right? That would make sense. However, the problem we are running into is more and more of our cognitive elite have just not had contact with the real world. They have not been placed into contact with the average man. If you were a lord in kind of the Middle Ages, you had to have some level of contact with your peasantry, right? You lived among them. You were in charge of that fiefdom. That was your land that you were given a charge over for the king, for kind of the higher nobility. And so you did not spend all of your time, unless you had like a Louis XIV situation, you not spend all of your time at court with the king. You spent most of your time amongst the people, right? That gives you a understanding of the day-to-day rhythm of the people. What are their customs? What are their folkways? What do they do, in their free time? How do they spend holidays? What do they celebrate? What do marriages look like? What's the dynamic between husband and wife? How's the education? How is the economics in that area? You had to be immersed in all of that, right? This is why our founding fathers believed that federalism was the best way to keep government accountable, right? You wanted the government to be as close to the people as possible. You didn't want everybody focused in Washington, D.C. You didn't want all your decisions made in L.A. or New York. You wanted your decisions made close to the people they affected, because you can't really be super far away and understand people. You have to live in their experience. Yeah, I know we're using lefty language, whatever, get over it. You have to live the experience. You have to have the way of being. You have to actually go through what other people go through to completely understand it. Okay. That is something that even the founders knew. That's not some left-wing thing. That's just the reality of ruling. That's just the reality of power. If you want people that care about you, if you want rulers and leaders who understand what's going on, they can't just model it abstractly, right? They have to be involved in the community. And of course, again, wealth and power have always concentrated. Nothing new about that. But at a certain level, we used to have leaders seated throughout different areas, right? You had communities, and yes, some of the best and brightest would move on, they would move out, they would go somewhere else, but the vast majority of the people, even the most intelligent ones, stayed in the area. The idea that you were constantly moving, you were constantly chasing another job or an opportunity was foreign for a lot of people. You set down roots, and those roots meant that even if you were above average intelligence, you didn't immediately just escape your lot in life in a particular class or a particular area. You stayed there and you bettered it. You became a leader. You became somebody that other people looked up to and modeled. You know, you had the rich guy at the end of the street with a Cadillac, but he was still on your street. He was still, yes, he owned the sawmill everybody worked at, but you saw him at church on Sunday. You saw him at the marketplace. There wasn't a separate market where only people like him went. Everyone had, the community was small enough, people are in touch enough to where you could see the leader, you could see the guy who owned things, you could see the guy who was running the show, and he had to be somewhat accountable to you. Now, could he be Mr. Potter? Yeah, sure, right? From It's a Wonderful Life. However, there was still a certain level of shame and a certain level of responsibility that was foisted upon nobility, right? Noblesse oblige. You had to see the people who your decisions were impacting on a regular basis. And that meant you understood the way that their life worked. Even if you were a little more out of touch because you were an elite, you still had to see them from day to day. However, the way we do things now is we aggressively test constantly everyone in the United States to try to suck the best and the brightest out of those areas, right? A lot of people will call this brain drain, right? You take all the best and the brightest out of, Ohio and Colorado and Mississippi, and you suck them in to schools in California and New York. And a lot of people are in the chat are recognizing what we're talking about here. This is also called the IQ shredder, right? Something that I have discussed with Nick Land on this channel before, the danger of pulling all of your intelligence and dropping it in to these places that just grind it up, right? You're not making anything real. You're not leading real human beings. You're just taking all the smartest people who would have improved the condition in Arkansas or in Nebraska, and instead you're pulling them into New York and California and Washington, and you're saying, okay, you just do a bunch of math, figure out a bunch of financial derivatives, spend all your time doing that, and don't get married, don't have kids, you're too busy, blah, blah, blah. You burn it out. Like, if you want to learn more about the IQ shredder, you can go back to my video on that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here, but these are very similar ideas, right? They run parallel to each other. Now, this phenomenon that we're talking about here was noticed by two different thinkers, but ones that I think are both important on the issue, Christopher Lasch and Charles Murray. Charles Murray, of course, wrote The Bell Curve, and he wrote Coming Apart. I highly recommend both of those books. And in Coming Apart specifically, though he talks about it in Bell Curve, of course, as well, he talks about, Murray talks about the dangers of cognitive stratification. He talks about how worried he is about this process because you're draining all of the intelligence out of kind of these Midwestern towns, all these places that have already been economically abandoned. You're abandoning them from talent as well, right? You're robbing them of the talent that would have rejuvenated these areas, would have led them into new and interesting and dynamic situations, and you're just sucking them into, personal finance or, whatever, the kind of industries in large cities. And his worry was not just that you were pulling this kind of cognitive elite out of places they could have helped, but you're also making sure that these people who would have been kind of in the gene pool in their areas, right? Like, you've got a smart guy. He is doing a lot of great things in Arkansas. He marries a woman who is kind of below his socioeconomic standing. They have children. They increase the intelligence in the area. Instead, you're just pulling him out and you're dropping him into a college where he's going to marry another college student who's also probably high IQ. And that's eugenic, right? In a sense, that, a lot of people cringe at that word, but that's what it means, right? Is, you're taking two highly intelligent people and you're making sure that they have even more highly intelligent children. And that's great, but you're removing them from the place that was already starved for talent, already starved for leadership, already starved for intelligence. And you're concentrating them and you're making them even more intelligent by having them breed. And then, so more and more intelligent people are kind of concentrating in these IQ shredder cities, these centers of cognitive stratification. They're being pulled out of their hometowns. They're being dropped into these areas. They're only having children with each other, right? They're only selecting for each other. They're getting more intelligent. They're pulling the intelligence out of the areas that are becoming less and less intelligent, because you're taking all the intelligent people that would have had kids in that area and you're dropping them in the big cities. A lot of times these people don't even have kids because the big cities really depress birth rates. They make sure very few people can afford to have children because of all kinds of different issues, career and everything else, all of that. And so you end up in this scenario where the gaps get wider and wider, right? The stratification of the cognitive ability gets wider and wider, more and more concentration of high IQ in these IQ shredder areas, and more of it hollowed out from kind of the middle of places like, the United States. And that's a huge problem, not just because of all of the brain drain and everything else we just talked about, all the economic impacts, everything else. The other big problem with doing that is you also create a scenario where more and more of the people who are running these organizations have no connection to anyone who has to live a working class existence. It's not just that, like, they have never really had to do the job. It's that they don't know anyone who's ever really had to do a job. They don't have friends and family members who have had to do that kind of work. They're just wildly disconnected from what that lifestyle is like. And so when you ask them, okay, what should we do with economic policy? What should we do with education? What should we do with all these things that are critical institutions that have a very big effect on how people live their lives? They can only really create the world that they live in. Like, the high IQ people who are supposed to be able to model all this stuff have a really difficult job modeling the life of a lower IQ person. And again, I want to make clear as we're talking about this, I'm not saying that these people are stupid. I'm not saying that these people are morally worse. These are just, this is just the reality of intelligence and the way that it works. Okay. So it's not like, these, high IQ people, they're the betters, and anyone left in the middle of the country, they're just so much worse. And how, these better people can't model the lives of these worse people. I am not saying that at all. Right. Because as we're going to get to in a moment, when the low IQ people lose all of the when they lose the motivation to keep all the machines running, all the machinery of the country running, the high IQ people are going to be in a real problem, a real mess, right? So one of the problems that we're really facing right now is that the majority of the people who are in charge of the United States have a very difficult time imagining the existence that people who are not in charge live day to day. Like, they just don't and it's not, and again, it's not just that they're out of touch, like every elite is out of touch. And it's not just that they are callous to the lives of those people and are only arranging society for their own benefit, though again, both of those things are very real. It's that a lot of them are genuinely interested in the well-being of the average person, but they just can't grasp the life of the average person. And I run into this all the time. even when I'm talking to conservative leaders who are supposed to be the representation of red America, right? These conservative thought leaders and influencers and politicians, they're supposed to be the ones who are plugged in and connected to these communities. They're not the people from LA usually. They're not the people from New York. They're not the people who are, representing kind of the urban elite most of the time. They're often the people who are supposed to be representing, Iowa and Ohio and, Montana and all these places. And yet still, they are very bad at grasping like what the average guy at Walmart is thinking and doing, right? They just have not had conversations with and are not, married to or related to anyone who really lives these lives. And so when issues like this come up, they just kind of fall in their faces. And so the example I want to use today is a discussion that kind of broke out on Twitter. Again, not really highly interested in the Twitter drama, just want to use it as a springboard for kind of this larger discussion. So a little bit of context. I already did an episode on this, but the H-1B thing was a huge blow up after, during and after Christmas, particularly Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. By the way, Ramaswamy has not tweeted since the beginning of the year. Take what you will with that. However, these guys really got into it with kind of the average MAGA Republican about H-1B visas. And the big argument was like, well, we just don't have enough intelligent Americans. Americans don't work hard enough. Americans aren't smart enough. And we need to bring in a bunch of people from outside the United States to do these jobs. Now, this goes against everything that the right has ever said, or even, every politician has ever said when it comes to immigration, right? The argument for immigration was always, well, immigrants are doing jobs that Americans just don't want to do, right? They're picking fruit or, taking out trash or, painting buildings or something, just menial labor that you're not going to want to do. And so that's why they need to come in. But then, as soon as we're like, well, let's fix the illegal immigrant problem, the script flipped. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, we need a lot of legal immigrants. Well, why are they picking fruit? I thought we just had that debate. They're like, oh no, they're programming computers. They're going to launch rockets. All those jobs that you got degrees for that you wanted to do. Well, actually, we're going to bring other people in to do them because you're just too lazy. Now we know that, yes, we've depressed your wages through immigration, and we know that you've been selected out of university educations due to DEI. And we know it's impossible for you to get an interview because, you're like a white dude or you're straight or you're male or whatever. Like, we know that, but we're not going to take any of that account, and we're not going to help you. We're not going to train Americans to do these jobs. We're not going to enter like a tech boot camp or something. We're just going to give these jobs to foreigners. And it's because you're lazy and you're stupid, right? And that did not go over well with the Republican base. Well, it got a little worse yesterday because a couple of guys, and I want to make it clear at the outset of this, I like most of the people I'm about to discuss. So this is not me like, they are the worst people, they are the enemy, you got to go after these people, blah, blah, blah. But they're just wrong. They're just stuck in like the worst conservative boomer mentality, just the same thing that the right has been telling young people my entire life. And it just has to stop. And so we're having this conversation not to condemn anybody, and not to like send in, in any, hostility. It's just, we can't do this, right? Like, people need to understand, just like Elon needs to understand, like, we're glad you're part of the coalition, but this is not the way to address this issue, right? So yesterday it kind of kicked off because there was this one account that had said like, I hope like all these 24-year-olds just completely fall out of the job market and they like fail. I would rather burn down society than like kind of see these people succeed. And that made a lot of people angry. Now he made some other comments, and like one of them was like, oh, well, full employment and things aren't so bad out there, and you can get stuff done. And Chris Rufo kind of jumped in and said, well, you were right about this. Now, I don't think Rufo was agreeing ultimately with him about like, I hope all the 24-year-olds burn and I would burn down the system to keep you guys from succeeding. I think he was trying to agree with kind of the idea that there's still opportunity in the United States, but the way that he did it was just really bad. It was just really poorly worded. The context was really bad. His response to people who were like, dude, what are you talking about, was not great. And specifically, he kind of said, oh, well, you could get a job managing a Panda Express or a Chipotle. And look at this. I've got a job listing that says Chipotle is paying managers $75,000 to $100,000. And who can't live off $100,000? If you're a young man and you don't have a wife and you don't have kids or whatever, you can still get out there and go become a Chipotle manager and make all this money, and you'll just be living the American dream. And a lot of guys like Matt Walsh, like, kind of bandwagoned onto this, and it was time for all of the classic, conservative talking heads to do their pull yourself up by your bootstraps, bucko, clean up your room, make something of your life, stop being a lazy good for nothing, get out there and get yours and whatever. That was kind of the response. And it was really tone deaf. Okay. And I want to be clear at the outset that work hard, do a good job, don't be above difficult work is good advice in a one-on-one situation, right? If I have a buddy and he's broke and he's sitting around saying, there's just no opportunities, I can't do anything, I can't get anywhere, my response to him is going to be like, yeah, man, I hear you. It's hard out there. There's a lot of stuff working against you, but ultimately you have to make decisions. And the only thing you can really control is not the world. It's not, what's holding you down. It's not the restrictions or what's working against you or the system. The only thing you control is kind of your effort and your response, right? And that doesn't justify the system that you're working inside of, but ultimately the only agency you have is your willingness to kind of work and get in there and get after it, right? And that means you might have to take a job that you don't like, but ultimately, that's better than just sitting around and playing video games and whatever. That is a better existence for you and will get you somewhere, right? That's good one-on-one advice, right? However, if your job is literally to shape public policy, you're not giving advice to your buddy who's down on his luck and depressed. You're talking to the nation. You're talking to the wider audience. You need more than, just kind of clean up your room, bucko, right? Again, Jordan Peterson's advice, great for you, the individual. Not great if you treat that as the answer to society's problems, because then that ignores, it's a free pass to ignore the problems that have been visited upon the current generations by previous generations for the profit and benefit of those generations. And this is not a hate a boomer moment. Okay. I want to be clear. There are plenty of great boomers out there who understand the problems that younger people are going through. But unfortunately, there's a certain mentality of entitlement, as if, everything was built by, people who were born in the 1940s and 50s. And really, they created civilization all by themselves, and they're just gifting it to everyone else. No, you were born in a very particular time when America had conquered the world and it had incredible opportunities. And before all kinds of mass immigration and other restrictions were placed on the ability of the average person to succeed. And so you benefited from a lot of this stuff. And that doesn't mean that your accomplishments aren't impressive, but it just means that your scenario will not be duplicated by the current generation. And I want to be clear, I am not a Zoomer, right? Most of this is pointed at Zoomer men. And I am not a Zoomer. I'm a millennial. In fact, I'm an early millennial. I'm kind of right on that line. Just a few years after Gen X. So I am closer really to Gen X than millennial. However, I've seen a lot of these problems in my own generation, right? I've seen, these problems are worse for Zoomers, but they existed beforehand, right? And so I've seen the precursors to this. And I've seen a lot of people, a lot of men my age and younger, really struggle with purpose and meaning and finding their place. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The most frustrating one, I think the one that a lot of people got angry about, and I think this is why there was so much of a response to kind of what Rufo and Walsh and them were saying, was that ultimately a lot of people were promised that if they went to college and worked hard, that was the path to success. It's not guaranteed. You gotta make your own way. But this is the path that you traveled in order to get to kind of that upward mobility, that American dream. And the problem was that that path had become increasingly difficult and expensive, right? You still have like grandparents telling like the story about how they paid for college with a summer job. And that's great, man. That's awesome. I'm glad that they had that experience and they were able to do that. I worked since I was 14. My first job was at a Subway. I rode my bike because obviously I didn't have a car up to the Subway and worked, making sandwiches. And it's a good experience, man. I worked in fast food. I worked as a waiter. I worked in retail. I worked construction. I've worked a lot of jobs that really are not great. Call centers. I worked in those jobs. And it's a good experience when you're young. It teaches you to get through difficult situations, not be too proud, keeps you humble, helps you connect with the people that you're going to be working with the rest of your life. Those are good experiences. However, I was never under the illusion that I was going to just pay for college by like working a Subway job, right? That's just not how that worked. I worked through all the college. I helped pay down a good amount of what I had to do. And, my parents were I was blessed. My parents were kind enough to help me with the rest, but that is not like everybody's situation. And it has only become more expensive, right? College has skyrocketed in costs. And so a lot of kids who went to college, even if they were working, even if they went to a state school, they didn't just go to an out of state college and take out $200,000 in loans or whatever, because they couldn't be bothered to work. Like a lot of people who still worked and did the right thing and were smart about it still ended up a scenario where they're paying a lot of money and end up in debt to get this degree. But finally they've got the degree, right? Finally they got the degree and they're going to break in, right? What do they discover? Oh, well, sorry. Actually, most of the jobs that you were going to use this college degree for, they've either been outsourced or we brought a lot of foreign labor in to do them. You got to compete with them. Oh, and by the way, because they're foreign labor, they meet DI requirements that you don't meet. So sorry, you don't get a job here, right? And so a lot of people are just grieving the loss of this like thing that they poured 8, 12 years of their life into, large amounts of money into, to find out that it doesn't do anything. Now, I get it. Like there are, dumb kids who got degrees in modern dance and went $200,000 into debt and never worked a day in their life. And they're like, oh, I can't make, $500,000 a year with my modern dance degree. Yeah, I get it. Okay, I understand that. I understand why you're mocking those kids. There's also plenty of kids who got degrees in engineering. Or even worse, like they got degrees in things like accounting that didn't even require a degree when their parents went to college. Certainly didn't require a degree when their grandparents went to college. It cost them nothing to enter those fields. They got an apprenticeship. They worked for a few years. Boom. They were like a professional, right? That was kind of how that worked. And those kids are spending, large amounts of money and time to get degrees and then find out, oh, sorry, like some guy on an H-1B is picking up that accounting job, that entry-level accounting job, because we just couldn't find Americans to do the job except you sitting here in front of me. So what we're going to do is, I guess you just need to find another way forward, right? And so when you got a bunch of conservative commentators and influencers saying, oh, well, sorry, guy, like I know that you worked really hard and you followed the rules, you got the grades, you did the work, but what you should really be doing is getting a job at Panda Express. Like, look at the money that you can make as a manager at Panda Express. You could still make that money. Isn't that great that opportunity is out there for you? Well, no, it's actually not great. If you're someone who like actually trained and got an education and went really hard in the paint to like get access to a specific type of job. No, it's actually not good. And that's not entitlement. That word was getting thrown around a lot. Oh, all these guys are entitled. They're too good to do these jobs. No, that's wrong. Again, I've worked a lot of, manual labor, food service. I am very familiar with these jobs. I was never too good for them. Okay. I did these jobs. So I am not saying this as like some pristine, Nepo baby who just, glided into, whatever I'm doing now and just can't connect. I have done these jobs. My aunts and uncles and cousins and friends do these jobs. Okay. I never moved to LA. I never moved to New York. I never disconnected from my friends, family, and community. I'm not surrounded by a bunch of people who all rotate shapes and write write abstract theory or something for a living. I'm surrounded by people who do normal jobs. These are still my friends. Friends who stock shelves, friends who do construction. Like these are the people, family members who were UPS drivers. I know the jobs that these people are talking about. I'm not speaking about them out of complete ignorance. And yes, if you are working a UPS job for 20 years as a union member and you get the best routes and stuff, you can make good money. You can actually pay for a family in this kind of thing. However, that is a lot of work, and you have to put in a lot of time. You have to be part of a union, right? Like these things can happen, but also like I know the people who broke their legs and threw their back out and couldn't be at work for years because of that. And then the strikes and everything else. Like it's good. If that's how you raise a family, there is nothing wrong with that. There is no shame in that. You are an honorable member of society doing good work. But I'm sorry, like Matt Walsh and Chris Rufo are not telling their kids to go like become UPS drivers for a living. That's just not reality, right? Like that's because they're part of the elite class and they know it, and they would never direct their children to like ultimately make that their end game, right? There is a lot of good reason to work those kind of jobs, like especially when you are trying to ascend the ladder, right? Drudgery in a lot of those jobs is difficult, but rewarding as long as you know you're building a better future for your kids and the kids after them. But if you can't get married and you can't have kids, then there's not as much motivation to do that. And if you already had parents that climb that ladder, the whole point was for that to be passed on to you. The point is not to be working 80 hours a week at Chipotle for the rest of your life and your descendants' lives and their kids and their kids and their kids. You're not supposed to become like some kind of feudal Chipotle slave. The reason to work like that is to create a future for your kids, to create opportunity. But if you're telling everyone, oh, we'll just go back to square one because we brought in too many people to be engineers at Tesla from India, well, what are they supposed to think? How are they supposed to invest in a future when that is what you are offering to these people? Another really important thing that people who are just like throwing around corporate manager jobs, like first, these salaries are fake, right? Like, sorry, no one is making, I shouldn't say no one. Someone is making $100,000 as like a general manager of a Chipotle. But, that's because Rufo's like in Washington, right? Like I went to the Florida average. It was like $50,000 a year, right? Which doesn't sound terrible if you're thinking in 1990 money, but inflation has doubled the cost of living in most of the important metrics and tripled it in some. Housing, healthcare, food, education, all the critical things that you need to like operate a household and have children, they're all radically more expensive. So sorry, but like $50,000 is more like $25,000 or $20,000 in 1990. If someone told you they were making $20,000 in 1990 in Florida, you'd be like, oh man, that's not good. And guess what? Housing prices in Florida are way out of proportion. They're even more inflated than they are in other areas. So that, $50,000 is your average Chipotle manager salary in Florida. Well, the average house is, depending on what source you're looking at, $380,000 to $400,000. Okay. You're never saving up a down payment like that. You're not going to create a scenario where the average person is going to be able to have a home and attract a spouse and have children, which is like the building block of conservative society. So if you give a crap about families, if you pretend to care even a little bit about the family values and the, reproducing the very scenario that creates the voters you rely on, then you need to have families, and you are advocating for a system that does not produce them. Just doesn't. Sorry. Money's not the only issue as to why people aren't having children. That's a much longer discussion, but it's one of them. And most importantly, the ability to have status, right? Like this matters. A lot of another problem with throwing around all these like corporate fast food manager jobs is that most of them are working for chain restaurants, right? There is nothing wrong with food service. There is nothing dishonorable, nothing below you about food service if it is in service of you advancing yourself, right? All human beings, but particularly young men, need agency, right? They need to master something. They need to own it. Excuse me. That's what makes work meaningful for them. So if you are working long hours in food service, but you're doing it because you own a diner, or it's a part of a family diner that you're going to own, that is a much different experience than just working at some nameless, faceless fast food chain that doesn't give a crap about you, will fire you at a whim the minute you get sick, the minute there's some kind of problem, like, and you're not going to inherit the store, like it belongs to someone else. The name is someone else's, everything, you can't make decisions. It's all wrapped up in the bureaucracy. It is the lack of the power process for those who are familiar with that term. There are a lot of people who have discussed this, from, Kaczynski to, to Baudrillard. There are a lot of people who have noticed this malady of kind of the current human condition. If you have a scenario where you're telling young men, oh, involve yourself in this, right? You can make your money here. Okay, maybe you might be able to make an okay living, but you have no agency. You have no authority. You have no vision. You have no future. And therefore, you have no status, right? One of the keys to the American existence was the idea of having that individual sovereignty in your ability to own something, right? I mean, obviously they're competing visions, but the Jeffersonian understanding of the United States was the citizen farmer. Every man owned his own plot of land and was self-sustained. And that's what gave him the authority to vote in and be a part of and have sovereignty in a republic, because he was an armed citizen with his own holding, able to care for his family. That is what made him a man, and what made him a citizen, made him worthy of having a voice in the government, right? Like, that is part of the American dream. And that's why the middle class was so important to the American dream, because it wasn't just about making a dollar amount. It wasn't just, oh, I hit $50,000 or $100,000. I'm part of the middle class. Being middle class meant owning a home, owning a car, and usually, eventually, owning a business. It was the independence. It was the bourgeois nature, right, of it, that ability to be landed, to own something, to have separation from the system. And that middle class existence carved out a very special existence for Americans, because they took that excess wealth and free time and everything else, and they put it back into community, right? They built churches, they built clubs, they built fraternities, they built all these social organizations that were critical and allowed the government to stay small, because there was all this web of institutions that carried people through difficult times and took care of the community. And it kept things local because everyone was invested in and tied into that community. If you reproletarianize the entire American middle class, if you make them all subject to wages and corporations, rather than giving them ownership over their homes and cars and businesses, then you are stripping away that very critical social glue that held America together and defined it, okay? And if all of your prospects for young men is like, hey, well, I mean, why don't you just go work for this corporate chain in the lowest status job possible? At least you'll make some money. Again, if I'm one-on-one with a friend and I'm looking at it, I'm like, dude, it's either you work at Panda Express or you're homeless. You need to go to Panda Express. It's either you work at Panda Express or you can't feed your kids. You need to go work at Panda Express. That is absolutely advice I give one-on-one to a friend who I have earned the right to say that to. I know him. I know his kids. I know his situation. I know his options. And before I say that to him, before I give him that tough love, I'm still going to tell him, but I hear your problems. I see the issues you're facing. I sympathize. And that way he knows the context that advice is coming in. But when you look at a bunch of people you don't know who have been systematically removed from our economy, from our educational institutions, from the ability to make money, people have been lied to about the money and time they're investing in college degrees and all this thing. When you look at them and you're just like, well, maybe you could just work a job like this. they get very angry, right? They have an emotional reaction. It's not that there is no truth in that tough love, but there has to be love in that tough love. The love has to exist. The trust has to exist. You have to show me that you understand the condition of the common man before you start preaching to them. That's what people want to hear. It's not that they don't want to be led. It's not that they don't want to be challenged. The reason that Vivek's speech on how Americans are lazy and stupid was so terribly received is because he's an immigrant. Well, he's not, he's born in America, but he is a second generation, I believe, American, born here, but like he comes from outside. He is Hindu. He's supporting a culture that is not American. And he's comparing his immigrant culture to America and saying, well, the immigrant culture is better, right? Like he is saying that this immigrant culture is better than the United States. And so it feels alien. It feels like an attack. It is an attack coming from outside the culture. Hey, I'm an immigrant. I'm something different. And because my people are smarter and better, we did things better. And therefore we should take all the jobs. And you guys who are dumb and lazy, you need to improve your culture. And until then, I'm going to fill all those jobs with people who have my culture. Like people feel that very viscerally. And it's a very similar thing when you have these conservative talking heads who have spent most of their lives, living in kind of metropolises, these IQ shredder cities, going to elite institutions, drawing large paychecks. I worked hard. Yes. But I also got very lucky. Okay. I'm not going to pretend that I grew up some poor black child, right? Like my dad was a lawyer, but he became a lawyer because he joined the military and they paid for it. And before that, he came from working class stock. My grandpa was a mechanic. My their grandfather was a supply sergeant, an enlisted man in the Air Force his entire life. Okay. Like they were hardworking. They were good people. They were intelligent, but they weren't exactly world leaders. Okay. So I have a lot of family members who are still in kind of those roots in that background, and they're awesome people and they deserve to be treated that way. They deserve to be understood and treated with respect and told, hey, yes, maybe you can do better. Maybe there is some tough love you need to hear about certain things, but ultimately I understand that inflation is destroying the value of your dollar. I understand that the pathways to upward mobility that were laid out for you have failed. I understand it's very difficult for you to get a home and start a family. And we're going to address those issues. But while we're addressing those issues, if you got to take a job at Panda Express, take it. All right, fine. That's a much better message. But that's not the message that people got. And that's why the reaction came. And I think, again, a lot of this comes from this cognitive stratification. It's a bunch of guys who just don't have a lot of people around them who live in that scenario. They just don't know people who are in these industries, who have been through this stuff. Yeah, I got friends who are making tons of bank doing construction. But guess what? They're like the top 5%. And the rest of the people in construction are burned out. They fall off a roof. They spend a lot of their life lugging heavy stuff all around. They get permanent injuries. That work's still got to get done. I'm not decrying any of that, but I'm just saying, like, sorry, not everybody who goes into the trade ends up making $200,000, $300,000 a year as a plumber. Some do, and it's awesome for them, and you should do that if you can. But that is not a blanket solution any more than college is a blanket solution. And we need to address those issues. We need to address housing. We need to address immigration. We need to address the college monopoly on credentialing. Like, we need conservatives to put their money where their mouth is and actually hire conservatives instead of hiring very not conservative people for very conservative jobs. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, when you behave like that, you can't be surprised when you get the response that you do, because you're saying one thing with your mouth and then you're walking an entirely different walk. And people notice and they don't like it and you get bad reactions. I think we need more people who are tied into these communities. And with remote work, that should be very easy, right? Now, there's no reason that you need to concentrate everybody in New York or LA or DC. You can actually have people live in the areas that they're trying to influence, the people they're supposed to be representing and working for. Like, you don't have to go to all of these cities and become highly cosmopolitan and, live your life trying to get to different cocktail parties rather than connecting with people. Like, you have that option now. All right, guys, let's go to the questions of the people real quick here. Jacob says, everyone asks, how do you like them apples? But nobody asks, how do you rotate them apples? Yes, the far more important question. Can you visualize them apples? Tiny Stupid Demon says the most important ideas in the bell curve is where they talk about how much society stratifies on IQ. Everybody I know thinks like me, so surely everybody I don't know does too, right? Yes, that's exactly the phenomenon we're talking about, right? I have this particular IQ. Everyone must understand the world the way that I do. Completely oblivious to the fact that actually intelligence radically defines the way you live your life, the way you perceive the world, the way you interact with others. And the only way you can see those differences is being in those communities. You can't model them abstractly. You just have to be in them. You got to touch the grass in the communities where you're actually going to govern. You can't just tell people from afar, hey, well, have you tried working at the UPS? Like, you need to know people who have been through that and to be able to advise them personally in a way that actually matters to them. Perspicacious Heretic says, a lot of people look back on their hometown and say, I'm glad I left. Look how bad it's gotten here, not realizing it's because they left. Exactly, right? It is that you are pulling people out who would have improved that town, who would have provided leadership, who could have been the George Bailey, right? In that moment, you're pulling them out and you're saying, nope, just send them to college, never come back, never look back. Again, that's what Christopher Lasch talks a lot about in his book, is how much the way that we kind of farm elites out of our average neighborhoods decimates them. The hollowing out of the middle class, the Rust Belt, the working class, those are not accidents. Those are not unavoidable things. They are a very specific phenomenon that is encouraged by the way that we have created our society. And when you ignore that and just say, hey, why don't you go get a fast food job? You're missing a lot. Nathan Looklow says, I don't want to work in a restaurant my whole life. Elites learn to code. Now I learned to code and I can't find a job. Elites go work in a restaurant. Right. Precisely. Right. Hey, we're phasing out these jobs. They're not going to be here anymore, but you could go learn to code and you'll be valuable. Okay. I went to college. I got the degree. I learned to code. Where's my job? Oh, we gave it to someone else. You didn't think you were entitled to it, right? We gave it to a foreigner who's going to make less money because you're lazy, even though you did exactly what we told you to do. But have you considered going back and doing the job we told you to abandon? Like, there's a reason people are angry, and they're right to be. K-Max McDonald says, learn to code, now switch to learn to make a sandwich. Yeah, I said from learn to code to learn to fry. How does Con Inc. always find a way to stop seeing what a problem immigration is? That is always how they appear out of touch. Yeah, again, that's bang on. Exactly right. If people who, it's not that they had no truth in part of what they were saying, they were so tone deaf in the way they were saying it, and the people they were saying it to had endured so much of this garbage, again, from people who are often talking down to them from positions where they have never been through these difficulties, it's going to make people angry. Tiny Stupid Demon says, just read a Canonical of Leibowitz, and I'm halfway through After Virtue, so this is timely. Struck by MacIntyre's idea that managerialism is fundamentally impossible. Bring on the simplification. Yes, I discussed that in my book, The Total State. You should read After Virtue. It's an amazing book, but I specifically expound on his managerialism critiques, which you wouldn't expect in a book that is primarily about Aristotelian virtue ethics, but he does have a excellent chapter on it. Florida Henry says, boomers may be the first generation in history where the saying, respect your elders, won't apply. Again, I don't want to just make this like straight up boomer hate. Again, like a lot of the guys who were making this criticism in online yesterday were not boomers in age, Rufo and Walsh, they maybe in mentality in this area, but they are millennials that are kind of giving the same old song and dance. And this is what I'm trying to break conservatives of. Again, I don't hate these people. In a lot of cases, I like these people. They just got to break out of this, man. They got to break out of this. This mentality is poison, okay? It doesn't help anyone. It's gross. It insults young people who are working really hard and trying to figure things out. And again, it doesn't mean they don't ever need to hear tough love. It just means you got to put in the work, man. You got to build the credit. You got to have that relationship. You got to be willing to say, I have taken action on these like 7 issues, but until we get to it, here's the tough thing. You got to pull through this. That's a much easier message to hear. But if you don't preface it with that stuff, it just sounds callous. Blue Wizard Robe says, we are all Sky King now. Sorry, I don't know if maybe that's a lyric or something. I don't have that reference right away, but thank you for the super chat. Sorry. And George Hayduke says, take on white collars turning blue. I know a lot of grad degree holders becoming carpenters, welders, electricians, good pay, and potential autonomy. Again, there are people who find that, right? There are people who go through the grind of these, these academic careers and find that it's just not worth it. They're not making enough money. It's not practical. It's just not fulfilling. And they end up doing blue collar work because they're very intelligent. They can easily pick up a trade, these kind of things. And for them, that's great, right? Like, more power to them. There is nothing wrong with being a carpenter or a welder or an electrician. There just isn't. Those are honorable professions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with adopting them. But if you're trying to build a movement, if you're trying to tell people, hey, we're going to give you a future and we want you to be able to aspire, we're going to create conservative leaders. We're going to build them up. We're going to put conservatives in important institutions. We're going to take over those institutions that have been marched through. You can't just do it with electricians and welders and carpenters. And you need those people, okay? Because guess what? All the white papers in the world, all the think tanks in the world, all the media empires in the world don't function without those people. And you need to respect them. Long haul trucker is making your life possible, and they deserve your respect. But at the same time, we're not pretending that long haul truckers are making all the decisions that change our educational system, that determine our judiciary branch and its makeup, that reform the executive branch. Like, that is just not the case, and everyone knows it. So if you're complaining about the quality of talent inside a conservative movement that doesn't allow you to fill positions, well, then maybe you should invest in it. Rather than just saying, oh, well, I guess we'll hire a bunch of liberals to do the job instead, right? Like, or we'll just send all the promising conservative talent to go, be a welder. Again, nothing wrong with being a welder, but you can't do investigative reporting if you're welding, okay? So you have to have a recognition that there are lots of really great, honorable positions that are not ever going to achieve a certain level of impact on a macro bureaucracy, but will have a giant impact on their community, and they can be leaders and contribute powerfully in that capacity. And that is awesome. And they should be honored for that. But we have to have a reality involved, right? You just can't tell people that, sorry, we're not going to solve any of your problems, but hope you tough it out, at a fast food chain. My entire life, conservatives said, well, we can't raise minimum wage because, that's not what fast food workers are. It's not a profession that you do your entire life. It's a stopgap that you do until you get a real job, a good job, right? And now they're like, well, yeah, of course you should work at fast food until you're, 50. Come on, guys. We got to have some level of consistency here. Otherwise, people just feel like the rug is being pulled out from under them, because it is. And that's garbage. And people deserve better, and you should treat them better and be more thoughtful about the way you address these issues. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It's been great talking to you. If it's your first time on this channel, make sure that you subscribe, click the bell, notifications, all that stuff, so you know when the live streams are available. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. If you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, it's now out in audiobook. I've heard there's some problems with the UK edition, but the publisher is addressing them now, so it should be available soon. If you're in the US, you absolutely can listen to the book if you've been waiting to hear it. And of course, if you would like to support the show, you can go to blazemedia.com and go to the Auron MacIntyre Show and pick up some merch so you can show everybody how much you enjoy listening. All right, guys. Thank you all for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.